Asmat Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Paramagurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarvagurubhyo Namaha. So continuing on with Agamas and South Indian Vaishnavism, we were last time we were talking about the Vaikanas Agama. We started talking about the Vaikanas Agama, which is one of two Agamas, two methods of worship of Lord Vishnu. Previous to that, we had talked about all the different types of Agamas. Now we're focusing in on Vaishnava Agamas, of which there are two types. We're taking the Vaikanas Agama first because it's less used. It uses only Vedic mantras. And last time we talked about the reasons why to accept Vaikanas Agama, how it can be accepted and why it's not rejected as a method of worship of the Lord. And now we're going to talk about actually what the procedures of Vaikanas Agama are. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Let's have a look at the text. Right, we finished off at this point. It says, so we finished off and we said, okay, so the Lord, Bhagavan, could be worshipped in four ways. And so again, we're talking about Vaikanas Agama here. But this may also be applicable later on to any Agama or to Pancharatra Agama also. So let's have a look at this. So the Lord, Bhagavan, could be worshipped in four ways, namely Japa, Huta, Ahuti, or Huta means into the fire, offering oblations into the fire. Japa means, recitation of mantras. Archana normally means the offering of flowers or tulsi, or in the case of goddesses, kumkum, along with the different names of the Lord, right? Usually preceded by Om and followed by the dative case and Namaha. That is called Archana. And Dhyana means meditation of the Lord. Okay, so Japa, Huta, Archana, and Dhyana are the four ways which he's stating here. Is mentioned in Vaikanas Agama that the Lord can be worshipped. Japa is to be done meditating on a mantra of Vishnu. Performance of Agnihotra and other such rites comes under the Huta, the section Huta or Homa. The third is the offering of worship to the Lord in a deity in the temple or house, following the method of the Vedas, right? Vedic method, because we're talking about Vaikanas Agama here. Dhyana consists of meditation on God through yoga. So yoga here doesn't mean hatha yoga, but it means all the processes of yoga. So we can think about the Astanga yoga. It basically means deep meditation or remembrance of God. We could involve also the different mantras. So among these, Archana is the means to attain all objectives. So these quotations are coming from the quotation here that he's quoting that gives these four things is from the main text of Pramanas for Vaikanas Agama, which is called the Vimala Archana Kalpa. Vimana Archana Kalpa. So otherwise known here as VK. Okay, so now here in this particular quotation that he gives, the word Samashrayana, he says that Samashrayana is used in this, but because the Vaikanasans, they don't do an external Samashrayana ceremony, right, which is like the Panchasamskara of the other Sri Vaishnavas, right? So therefore the word Samashrayana here simply means to worship. Samashrayana literally means to surrender to God. So among these, Archana is the means to attain all objectives, right? So the emphasis in Vaikanas Agama is on Archana, the worship of the deity in the temple, and not on japa, not on fire ceremony, not on meditation. Okay. So the Lord becomes fivefold for this purpose with the names Vishnu, Purusha, Satya, Achyuta, Ananta, Achyuta, and Aniruddha. So So this is very interesting. Just like we have in the Pancharatra Agama, we have these Chatavyuha, Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna. Here we have Vishnu, Purusha, Satya, Achyuta, and Aniruddha. Among them, Vishnu is the foremost, and it's called the Adi Muti, right? And this is a quotation. This is a quotation also from Vimana Archana Kalpa, and also from Samurtarchana Adhikarana. So, God, who is subtle, pervading every being, must be looked upon as not different from him, who presents himself in the gross form as the deity, and gross meaning tangible, made of material, seemingly made of material elements, and worship must be carried out without having any idea of the distinction between the two. Right. So when we worship the deity, we think that the deity is non-different from the original personality of Godhead, in this case, Vishnu. Right. These 5 forms are distinct from one another, like the 5 fires. There are 5 fires, Vedic fires, which are known as Sabya, Ahavaniya, Avaharya, Garhapatya, and Avasatya. And like the 5 pranas. What are the 5 pranas? Prana, Apana, Vyana, Udana, and Samana. So now there are actually 10 pranas. There are 5 subsidiary ones, or upa pranas also. But these are the 5 main ones: Prana, Apana, Vyana, Udana, and Samana. So these things are all, these 5 forms of God, Vishnu, Purusha, Satya, Achyuta, and Aniruddha, are compared to Sabya, Ahavaniya, Avaharya, Garhapatya, and Avasatya. Now, I've heard of all these 5 fires except for the Avaharya. Avaharya, usually we hear of Dakshinagni instead of Ahavarya. So Ahavarya may be another name for Dakshinagni. Dakshinagni is usually in the south, right? Squiz Dakshina means to the right or in the south. If we're in the east and we turn to the right, we get the south. Okay, so this is a quotation from Vimalarchana Kalpa, right? And also from Samurtarchana Adhikarana for derivative significance of the names of the 5 fires. We can look to this Sarchana Adhikarana, right? Samurtarchana Adhikarana, number 29. All right, so let's continue on. Vishnu is all-pervading. Purusha is animating. Satya has unlimited static experience. Achyuta does not change under external influence. And Aniruddha has no check from any source. Again, all these are quoted from Vimala Archana Kalpa or from Samurtarchana Adhikarana. Vishnu is also called Adi Muti, has 4 forms called Mahavishnu, Sadavishnu, Vyapin, and Narayana. Satya, now did we mention Satya? Yeah. Purusha, Satya is the second one, the third one after Purusha. Okay, Vishnu, Purusha, Satya. Satya arose from Mahavishnu. Achyuta arose from Sadavishnu. Aniruddha from Vyapin. Purusha represents a part of Vishnu. Dharma, Jnana, Aishwarya, and Vairagya. Dharma means religiosity. Jnana means knowledge. Aishwarya means leadership or opulence, right? And Vairagya means renunciation, right? Are qualities of Purusha, Satya, Achyuta, and Aniruddha respectively. This also comes from the same Samurtarchana Adhikarana. Okay, Prakriti, or material nature, is both sentient and insentient. Okay, so he gives a quote from Vimala Archana Adhikarana for that. Vimala Archana Kalpa from that. from that. The former is the self, right? So in Vaikanas Agama, they actually divide, they say Prakriti is the sentient Prakriti and insentient Prakriti. The sentient Prakriti is the selves or the Chaitanas, the living beings. Right, the former is a self, which is ever associated with a material body, so the Buddha Jivas, the bound souls, and gets affected by it as a result of the deeds done by it before getting into it. The deeds done by it before getting into it. That's a very interesting statement there. What he means by that, I have no idea. How can you do deeds when you don't have a body? And therefore the body is the result of those deeds. Don't know. Okay. Normally we think of the living being embodied since time immemorial, right? And there being some sort of initial karma called parabdha karma, which helps to manifest the initial bodies. But after that, the bodies are manifest by the karmic reactions as the soul travels through body after body in samsara. The self migrates from body to body and suffers the results of its deeds. In sentient Prakriti, so the Vaikanas Agama also has it has this same basic philosophy that we find in other forms. So insentient Prakriti is represented by the product of matter, such as the 5 elements, the mind, the senses, and other things, which we know if we can look at the other 24 elements in the Sankhya theory of creation. The process of creation is stated to be due to God's will, but is not described as such. So if we look so this is also a quotation. It says, there is no reference in the Vaikanasa text to the theory of creation. It may be because in the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, it's understood by Ramanuja that Ramanuja accepted the system of Ishvara Sankhya, the Sankhya system of creation. Ka, which means Ka is Priyadhikara, which is another Vaikanasan book, right? Mentions that Brahma was asked by Vishnu to create the world. That's mentioned in chapter 36, 5-7 of Priyadhikara. Again, Vimana Archana Kalpa, which is our main book for Vaikanas, states that the creation is effected at Brahman's will. Okay, so there is a glorious description. So, the process of creation is not per se described in the Vaikanas Agama. So it's taken from somewhere else, probably, as we say, from the system of Sankhya. So there is a glorious description of Vishnu who pervades the entire world and remains there as the inner controller. The universe is conceived as his body, several things in the created world becoming his limbs. Right. So it's interesting here, they say underneath about some part of this quotation, I think. JK. JK is Jnana of Kasyapa Samhita, which I believe Kasyapa Samhita is a Vaikanasa Agama. Okay, so it says here that this resembles the following Dhyana Sloka in the Vishnu Sahasranama, suggesting that one must have been borrowed from the other. Okay, where is the Dhyana Sloka? Okay. Let's continue on. This resembles the following Dhyana Sloka from the Vishnu Sahasranama, suggesting that one must have been borrowed from another, though it is not possible to fix the priority or posterity of either. Bhupado yasya nabir virda surya nilas chandrasuryo chanetre karnavasha shiro dyo mukhamapidahano yasya vaste yamabdihi antastam yasya vishwam suranaga kaga go bhogi gandharva daityaihi Chitram Ram Ram Yatetam Tribhuvanam Vapusham Vishnavisham Namami. Right? So that is the sloka given here. Right. And then we have another sloka here, Chiti Padocha, etc., which comes from Paushkara Samhita. Now, Paushkara, usually, Paushkara Samhita is a Pancharatra Agama, so I don't know why that's being brought in here. Not exactly sure why that's being brought in here. So the selves are distracted by the Lord's Maya. Okay, so the individual cells in the material creation in Prakriti are distracted by the illusionary energy of the Lord and being subjected to the sway of passion, anger, avarice, and others, commit sinful deeds which bring them to the world again and again. These sufferings could be avoided once and for all by God's grace, which can be attained by worshiping Him. So again, we have another quotation from Vimana Archana Kalpa. The worshipping of Vishnu is enjoined as the means of obtaining security from the dangers of the world and freedom from bondage. Here again, the worship of the Lord in the form of the deity is declared to be the best. And that's a quotation also from the same, from Vimana Archana Kalpa. How this worship could be conducted effectively gets elaborate treatment in this Agama. So the description, again, in the same book, the description of the human body as possessed of the chakra of 12 spokes, the Kundalini Shakti, right? Various ducts or nadis or nerves, right? And chakras made of them, right? The different chakras in the body, along with the names of 12 nerves like Pingala, Shushumna, Ida, etc., which anybody who is familiar a little bit with Kundalini Yoga can understand, and others, reveals that the Vaikanasa Agama belongs to the yoga tradition. There is a detailed account of the practice of yoga, which is required for self-control. Deep meditation is needed to visualize God who occupies the heart of the self. So God is there within the heart. The means of getting moksha is only through God's grace. So in this way, it's not, Vaikanasa Agama is not incompatible with Sri Vaishnavism, because the idea in Sri Vaishnavism also is to get the grace of God, and that's the only way to attain moksha. And in fact, most Vaishnavism, the idea is ultimately we have to get the grace of God, otherwise we can't get moksha. While dealing with the performance of yoga, the value of the mantras is appropriately depicted. Pranava, or the Omkara, is described as resembling a human being encompassing the entire world. In that quotation, I'm assuming that also comes from, Vimana Archana Kalpa. Right, a similar treatment is given to the Gayatri mantra. There is then the representation of the syllables of the Gayatri Nyasa, which means the different touching of the mantra Nyasa that we use for Gayatri, for the Gayatri mantra. Each syllable has a presiding deity. Each syllable of the Gayatri mantra has a presiding deity. The japa of this mantra thrice a day is declared to yield manifold benefits, commencing with long life and ending with final release or moksha. So all of this is described in the Vaikanasa Agama's main book, Vimana Archana Kalpa. Before explaining the process of meditation, the nature of the human body, its protection, development, and attributes are set forth. The three qualities, sattva, rajas, and tamas, or goodness, passion, and ignorance, are then described with reference to their features and the features that they produce in human beings. As long as the self is encased in the physical body, there are three states of consciousness through which it gets experience, namely waking, dream state, and deep sleep. Deep sleep means without any dream. So the state of transcendence is also attainable. The state of transcendence is also attainable. So it's unclear when he says this whether he means it's attainable in this body itself, which would be a form of jivan mukta, liberation within the material body, or not. So I'm not sure whether Vaikanasa Agama is like the rest of the Sri Vaishnavas who say Videha Mukti, only when the body is finished do we attain moksha. But here seems to be the state of transcendence is also is also attainable. So we know transcendence is attainable, but whether it's attainable in this life, in this body itself, that's another question. The Lord is present in the central portion of the body where blazes forth a fire of golden hue in a triangular form. So probably we're talking about the heart chakra here being in triangular form and being colored gold. The Lord is present within it as Yagyamurti. So Yagyamurti is the name given to the form of the Lord there in the heart chakra. There is a chakra of 12 spokes in the navel. So in the navel, usually we have usually in the yoga system, we have the Muladhara, Swadhisthana, Anahata, whatever the navel chakra is, right? There's a chakra of 12 spokes in the navel. The self, which is under the influence of merit and sin, revolves there in the navel chakra, residing on the vital airs, like the spider amidst its web. So this is an interesting concept. They think of the Vaikanasas, they think of the soul as being situated in the nabi or the navel area, or the navel chakra. There is the Kundalini Shakti, which is the power of the Kundalini, right, above the navel, covering the cavity of the Sushumna Nadi. So the nadis are the different pathways, nerves, subtle nerves, right? And Sushumna is the one which goes up the middle of the spine, right? And then the Ida and Pingalas cross over. And they start off, the Ida starts off on the left, the Pingala starts off on the right, and then they cross over. And where they cross over are the different chakras. Okay, so the heart, which is situated above the navel, has a brilliant flame as of the orb of the sun, in the midst of which there is a form of Vishnu shining like the rising sun with 4 hands, 2 of whom are holding discus and conch, the third in abhaya, and the other, abhaya means don't fear pose, right? And the other bedecked with ornaments resting on the waist. So he is with Shri and Bhudevi and his retinue, his associates. So Narayana is also present within the orb of the moon, right? Shining at the tip of the nose. So if we look at the nose level of the individual, right, there's a chakra, and it's conceived of as being like the moon, and Narayana is also present there. Vasudeva shines. So what did he say? Yagyamurti is there in the heart, right? Narayana is there shining at the tip of the nose. Vasudeva shines in the upturned lotus at the top of the Sushumna Nadi. At the top of the Sushumna Nadi, which means top of the head, right? There is Vasudeva, which is interesting because this is the name that we remember when we touch the top of the head when we do Tirumankapu or putting on a Vaishnava tilaka. So Vasudeva is reminded of that part of the body. So it seems like that comes, at least it is also comes from Vaikanasa Agama. Whether it's in Pancharatra Agama, we don't know, but it's conceived of in Vaikanasa Agama. So Vishnu, who is present in the heart, must be meditated upon. The ducts or nadis, right, otherwise like the subtle nerves, are stated to be 72,000 in number. And when Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna and 11 others are prominent. The first 3 of these play an important role in man's contemplation, and even there, the Sushumna is held to be the path for obtaining final release, the path of the soul to go on the Achiradi Marga to liberation, to moksha. These 14 are spread over the body. What were the 14? There's 11 prominent plus 3 prominent, Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna. These are spread all over the body. Besides the 5 vital airs, prana and other, there are 5 others, which I just mentioned before, making a total of 10, right? Naga, Kurma, Krikara, Devatata, and Dhananjaya. Among them, prana rests between the mouth and the nose, between heart and navel, and between the two great toes. So, between the mouth and the nose, between the heart and the navel, and between the two big toes, one on each foot, right? That's where prana rests, right? Okay. So now this becomes important to know these places where prana, apana, vyana, and dana are. When we do the prana pratishtha, we link up these places with the deity in the heart, right? With the Lord's presence in the heart. So when you want to enliven a murti, you have to remember where the different life airs are constituted in the body and how they act in the body. So we'll remember here, prana rests between the mouth and the nose, between the heart and the navel, and between the two great toes, two big toes. Apana is in the navel, in the excretory and generative organs, the anus of genitals. Right? Vyana is in the joints. Udana in the throat. Samana all throughout the body. Naga in the throat. Kurma in the eyes. Krikara in the stomach. Devadatta throughout the body, and Dhananjaya all over the body. Right. So this is also mentioned in the Vaikanasa Agama in that Vimana Archana Kalpa. Okay, so through japa, homa, archana, and dhyana, which are the four processes of worshiping God according to Vaikanasa Agama, are declared to be the four courses for pleasing God. The Vaikanasa Agama stresses the significance of archana, which will accomplish all that one likes to achieve. That was mentioned before. So, yet the path of meditation is described at great length, unlike in the yoga system, which treats the separation of the self from Prakriti as yoga, right? The separation. So, yoga, the idea is in the yoga system, the idea is to separate the self or the individual jivatman, right, from the material body and join it up with the Supreme Brahman or Supreme Person, right, Sriman Narayana. Right, that's yoga means linking, so it means delinking from matter and linking with the Supreme, right? So here, this system considers union between the self and Lord as yoga. So union of the self and the Lord as yoga, whereas so he's saying here that the yoga system normally talks about the separation of the self from Prakriti, but here it specifically means linking with the Lord. Right. Among the 8 constituents of yoga, yama, so we know yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, and these are the Asanga yogas, the 8 limbs of yoga as taught by Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras. So we have yama is said to be, yama means actually following rules. Yama is like things that we have to do, rules that we have to follow. And rules that we have to follow where we have to not do things, certain things are called niyamas usually. So yama is said to be of 10 kinds, of which the first 2 are identical with those given by Patanjali. Okay. Asteya is, and that's a quotation from Yoga Sutras 230. Asteya, right, is referred to by the word acharya. Brahmacharya is stated to be the householder's attachment to his wife, and as such means making no advances to other women. Right. So, okay. So for the Vaikanasins, unlike in the yoga system of Patanjali, normally celibacy is considered to be a part of the yoga system of Patanjali, but here is saying here brahmacharya, which is normally translated as celibacy, right? Simply means for the Vaikanasin householder, it simply means attachment to no other women but his wife. Right. So the other six, which are stated here as Daya, Arjava, Shami, or Shanti, Darya, Mitashana, and Socha. Niyama, right? So that was an explanation of of yama. Now, niyama, this is the second, so yama niyama is the first of the two of the 8 angas of Astanga Yoga, according to Patanjali. Niyama is of 10 kinds, of which tapas and santosha means pleasing, right, or being satisfied, right, santosha. Tapas and santosha agree with the enumeration of Patanjali. So this is also a commentary. This is from the next verse of Yoga, or the next sutra of Yoga Sutras, 231. Other than Astikya Dana, Vishnu Puja, Vedanta Shravana, Kutsita Karmasu, Laja, Guru Padesha Shraddha, Mantra Bhyasa, and Homa. Others. These are other parts of niyama. The use of the word Vishnu brings out the identity of the Godhead. The 7th is an explanation of Hri. Hri normally means the goddess Bhumi Devi, as we see in the Uttanavaka of the Purusha Sukta, Hristite Lakshmi Stapatnyam. And the next shows the importance attached to the role played by the preceptor, the 7th. Okay, so we have 10 kinds of niyamas, right? We mentioned 6 of them here. Astikya Dana, Vishnu Puja, Vedanta Shravana, Shruti Kamasulaja, Guru Padesha, Shraddha means faith in the words of the Guru, Mantra Bhyasa, Homa, etc. So these are somehow these are 6. So I guess Vishnu Puja, Vedanta Shravana is 1, and still looks like 7 there to me. But anyway, the 7th is an explanation of Hri, right? And the next shows the importance of the role played by the preceptor. Oh, that could be this one. Is the 7th. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's like 7. Okay. The role of the preceptor. The 24 divisions of yama and niyama make an aspirant fit for understanding the meditative practices. Because these are all prerequisites stated in the Pancharaja, in the Vaikanasa Agama. This is also coming from Vimana Archana Kalpa. Right. So 9 types of postures or asanas, right, are recommended with the description of each and a classification of them as the best, mediocre, or ordinary. So a lot of times in classifications we have the Uttama, the Kanista or Adara, and the Madhyama, right? So the topmost, the middle, and the lower. Right, pranayama now, right? So he's talking about all the different forms. He's talking about the differences between the way the Vaikanasans see these Astanga, these 8 limbs of yoga, and the way that the followers of Patanjali see it. Right, pranayama gets a very detailed description in which it is shown how the vital airs are made up to pass through the different nadis. This purifies the nadis, or the subtle nerves, and enables the aspirant to have the lotus of the heart spread out so as to make him see Narayana there. So the idea is, if we read in the Upanishads, it talks about the heart, the human heart being very much like a folded lotus. So when you have a lotus flower, it can either be open or it can be closed. If you close up all the petals and you turn it upside down, it appears to be in the form of a heart shape. So the idea is that the normal person's heart is like that, is like a closed lotus bud. So the idea of pranayama is to open up the lotus so that we can see the person who's standing in the middle of that lotus in the heart, which is Srimad Narayana. Okay. So Pratyahara, after pranayama in Patanjali's system, we get Pratyahara. Pratyahara is of 5 kinds. The senses are withdrawn from their objects. The aspirant finds everything to be like himself. The vital airs are made to fill up the 18 vulnerable spots in the body and thereby maintain complete cessation of external activity. Right. Pratyahara means withdrawing the senses. It's a prelude to meditation. So dharana is of eight kind. Dharana means literally carrying or remembering, right? So dharana is of eight kinds, namely fixing up steadfastly the mind, control of akasha. Akasha means space, both within and without, right? Control of the five elements. The five elements are the gross portion of the body, right? Earth, water, fire, air, ether. Bhumi, Apo, Nalo, Vayu, Kam, right? Kam means space or akash, right? So within and without, so within the body and outside the body, keeping the blissful body of God in the heart, right? And so meditation on the Lord in the heart, dharana. Dhyana comes after that. Dhyana is of two kinds. So dhyana means meditation. Nishkala and sakala forms of God are meditated upon. Right. The former is not available even to the gods. The latter, right? So nishkala is apparently impossible to do, perhaps in this material body. Not even the devatas can do that, right? Sakala involves. Nishkala means without a piece, without a piece. Sakala means with a piece or with a portion, like that. Now Shakala is then further, is the type of meditation that we can do in Vaikanas Saga. We can do Sakala Dhyana, right? And the latter is of two kinds, Nirguna and Saguna. So normally Nirguna means without qualities, and Saguna means with qualities. Nirguna also, Sri Vaishnavas have said it means without material qualities, right? Now, obviously, if we're meditating on the Supreme Lord, obviously he doesn't have material qualities, right? So here, Nirguna and Saguna mean just what they say. Saguna means thinking about a particular form of the Lord, and Nirguna meditation would be thinking about the impersonal aspect of the Lord. Through meditation, the aspirant visualizes God as having supreme bliss in his form, meditating upon God as the store of auspicious qualities. Yagyamurti, remember in different parts of the body, in the heart, Yagyamurti, Vishnu, and Narayana is of the latter kind, meditating of God with auspicious form and qualities and form. Is of the latter kind with four subgroups having one of each of these forms. So we have these four forms. I'm not sure what the fourth form here is. Yagyamurti, Vishnu, Narayana, and maybe there was another one, Chuta maybe. Okay, so we're talking about 4 or 5 different forms. Okay, so then there are subgroups. Samadhi, which comes next after dhyana, right, which is deep anushmiti or anusandhana, which is constant remembrance without any break, is samadhi, right? Samadhi is a deep contemplation in which the self and God are in the same plane, right? As a stone that is not hot becomes heated by the sun's heat, the self acquires a flawless and blissful nature on visualizing God and continues to experience Narayana. As long as such a self remains in this world, it gets all kinds of siddhis, all kinds of mystic powers, and is practically released from bondage, though embodied, jivan mukta. Okay, so apparently, according to Vimana Achanakalpa, jivan mukta is a stage that can be achieved even within this life. So that's very interesting because normally in the rest of the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya, jivan mukta is not accepted. Only videha mukta, videha mukti, liberation after the body is fallen. This stage of feeling and experiencing the blissful state of final release while yet alive in this world is not attainable by any means other than yoga. Since it is said that the self gets all siddhis, this stage is not the same as in the Advaita system. Okay, so in the Advaita system, there is a concept of jivan mukti, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the person who is considered a jivan mukta has all mystic siddhis. Here in the Vaikanasa system, the stage of Jivan Mukta involves all mystic cities. Right, so there are 4 states of mental activity for man, right? They are waking, Jagrat, dream, Swapna, and deep sleep, Sushupti, and transcendence, or transcendental, which is called Turiya. Turiya means different things in Sanskrit. Turiya can actually mean the fourth, meaning the 4th state. So here, because it's given in a list of 3, after 3 things, it's the 4th. So Turiya can actually just mean the 4th. It also is a word that means Brahman, the supreme, right? Turiya. So again, those 4 stages are 4 stages of mental activity of a human being, right? Are waking state of consciousness, dream state of consciousness, deep sleep, which is practically unconsciousness, and then transcendental consciousness, which is called Turiya. So the effects on mental activities during these are respectively external knowledge, right, in awakening, internal consciousness during dreaming, right, and enlightenment during dreaming, right. There's an enlightenment in the stage of Turiya, right, and this is also where's this quotation coming from? Again, from this quotation is actually from. What is it? Jnana Kanda of Kashyapa Samhita. Right. Okay. So now the qualities of Dharma, Jnana, Aishwarya, and Vairagya, which we were talking about before, which each have 5 deities, which each possesses. Okay. The qualities of Dharma, which each of the 5 deities possess. Okay. So each of the 5 deities possess this Dharma, Jnana, Aishwarya, and Vairagya, the 5 deities that we had in the beginning, which we'll go back and just have a look at again. The 5 deities which are talked about in Vaikanasa Agama are Vishnu, Purusha, Satya, Achyuta, and Aniruddha. You can see that I'm not that familiar with the Vaikanasa Agama, so I'm just reminding myself here. Okay, so we're going to continue on. Okay, so the qualities of Dharma, Jnana, Aishwarya, and Vairagya, religiosity, knowledge, leadership, or opulence and renunciation, are manifest in all those 5 deities. The state of moksha is one of intimate union of the self with God, right? Not complete absorption, but intimate union with this, an intimate relationship, very close relationship. And this is also, it says here, the word sayuja is used, but of course we know the word sayuja coming from the Narayana Tavashira Upanishad, Narayana Sayuja Mavapnoti, Sriman Narayana Sayuja Mavapnoti, it says, Yaevam Veda. Okay, so here he's quoting from the Jnana Kanda. What is it? The Jnana Kanda of Kashyapa Samhita, again, which is a Vaikanasa Agama, page 30, right? And it says here, Vishnoho Sayujam Apnuyat. He will attain the close relationship with Vishnu, very close, intimate relationship with Vishnu. That this state should characterize the concept of moksha is justifiable because the self, which emerges from Prakriti, leaves the material world, right? That is, Shri, ever associated with God, should naturally get back to the place of emergence. Of course, with this difference that it returns rid of all residue of karma and with full enlightenment. So it's interesting here that it talks about, I don't know why he's put the word Shri here. Shri, ever associated with God, should naturally get back to the place of emergence. It's a little confusing here why he would use the word Shri here, because he's talking about the self-emergencing. Okay, that this state should characterize the concept of moksha is justifiable because the self, the individual self, meaning the jivatman, which emerges from Prakriti, that is, Shri ever associated with God? Okay, I understand. Okay. So Prakriti is conceived of as Shri. Shri is conceived of this material as this material universe that is associated with the Supreme Lord, Ishvara, or Sriman Narayana, right? Vishnu, right? So the individual is emerging from Shri, right, in her form as Prakriti, and is now becoming associated with God, getting back to associating intimately with Him after ridding himself of all the karma and the residual karma, etc., right, and attaining full enlightenment, right? Understood. Okay, so the place to be attained is called Vaikuntha, which, true to its name, cannot be deformed or maimed by any force. Right. It is far above the three others called Pramoda, Samoda, and Amoda in the descending order. Pramoda, Samoda, and Pramoda, Amoda, and Samoda and Amoda. Right. The last representing the stage where the regions called Vishnu Loka begin. In descending order. In the last where the regions of Vishnu Loka begin. Vishnu is the deity in Amoda. Mahavishnu is the deity in Pramoda. These are different realms, right? Sada Vishnu in Samoda, and Vyaptin is Narayana in Vaikuntha. Vyapin who is Narayana in Vaikuntha. Okay, so we have now, so let's start. So we have Vishnu in Amoda. Higher than that is Mahavishnu in Pramoda. Higher than that is Sada Vishnu in Samoda, which is not exactly the way that he said it. And then higher than that is Vyapin, right, who is also Narayana in Vaikuntha, right? That seems to be the idea. So this idea that Pramoda, Samoda, and Amoda are in descending order doesn't seem to be actually correct. That would be different from the next statement. The names of the three regions leading to Vaikuntha have significance in the sense that they provide room for the enjoyment of divine bliss. Okay, so among the pupils of Vaikanas, right? So there we had just a discussion about the yoga aspects and also the philosophical aspects of understanding of the world and nature and everything and its relationship to God. According to Vaikanasa Agama. Here, now he's going to go on to talk about the pupils of Vaikanas, namely four. There are four pupils of Vaikanas: Atri, Bhrigu, Kashyapa, and Marichi. So gave out their own versions of Vaikanasa Agama, which they had studied under Vikanas. So unfortunately, only a portion of each version is now extant. So the work of Marichi, so we have these four, Atri, Bhrigu, Kashyapa, and Marichi. The work of Marichi contains, in the last chapter of his Vimana Archana Kalpa. So Marichi is the author of this Vimana Archana Kalpa, which is being quoted all along. A list of works written by all the sages, including himself. So that's nice. The basis of these works is the Vaikanasa Sutra. So there are these Vaikanasa Sutras, and the basis of all these works are those. His Ananda Samhita, of which the Vimana Archana Kalpa is a part, contains a slightly different list. A slightly different list. Okay, so Marichi has got, so Marichi has got two books, the Vimana Archana Kalpa and the Ananda Samhita. In both the books, there are lists of other works of the Vaikanasa Agama, which are based on the Vaikanasa Sutra. Right, but those two lists differ slightly. Right, containing a slightly different list. Bhrigu's Jagyadikara and Atri's Samudharchanadikarna, which we also quoted just recently, right, contains their own lists. There is a discrepancy in the number of texts and in the names as found in these lists. So that's not unusual that we have different lists. Okay, so anyway, Atri is stated to have written four texts, namely the Purva Tantra, Atreya Tantra, Vishnu Tantra, and the Uttara Tantra. So according to the version of the Vimana Archana Kalpa, right? Remember, which was written by Brigu. Marici, which was written by Marici. Brigu's version mentions 11 works, amongst which the Samudarshana Adhikarana is stated to be the Uttara Tantra, right? So in Brigu's version, right, in Brigu's Yagyadikara, he has a list, and in his list he says the Samudarshana Adhikarana is also the same thing as the Uttara Tantra. So, apart from the 4 in Marici's list, in which Uttara Tantra is identified with the Samudra Archana Adhikarana, so it seems like in Marici's list also, Uttara Tantra is identified with this book, Samudra Archana Adhikarana. There are 7 others, among which a fragment of Nirupta Adhikarana, right, alone is available. A fragment of Nirupta Adhikarana. Now, usually the word Nirupta is a book of Vedic etymology. Here, we have a book called Nirupta Adhikarana, which apparently is different and belongs to the Vaikanas Agama. All these are said to have contained 88,000 slokas or verses. Except for these 2 works, all are lost. So except for these 2 works. So what does it mean by these 2 works? Does it mean... So it looks like we're talking about Vimana Archana Kalpa and Samudra Archana Adhikarana, which he's been quoting all along. So it sounds like the Uttara Tantra, the Uttara, we can say another name for Samudra Archana Adhikarana is the Uttara Tantra, but this other Nirupta Adhikarana seems to be lost. So some of these end their names with Tantra and others with Samhita. So this is very common that in the Agamas, we have books called Samhitas, we also have books called Tantras. Right, and they're basically interchangeable and synonymous words. Brigu's works are 13, according to Marici, named as Kila Tantra, Pura Tantra, Vasanadikara, Chitradikara, Manadikara, Kriyadikara, Archanadikara, Yagyadikara, Varnadikara, Prakirnadikara, Pratigrihyadikara, Niruktadikara, and Kiladikara. The lists of others enumerate less works. Brigu's list had only 10. Right. Among these, the Kriyadikara and the Yagyadikara are available in print. Okay. So these are some other books that are available, right? So we have the Kriyadikara and the Yagyadikara, right, which are apparently works by Brigu. Okay. So the Archanadikara and the Vasanadikara, and the Niruktadikara are available as manuscripts. Okay, so they are available, but they're only available as manuscripts, not printed books. The Mantradikara, Chitradikara, Varnadikara, and Pura Tantra are available as in fragments. So we just have fragments of manuscripts of those. The rest are lost. All the 13 works are stated to contain 88,000 slokas or verses, except 2 which end their names in the word Tantra. All the rest are called Adhikara. Okay. So now Kashypa's works are 3 in the list of Marici. They are Satyakanda, Tarkakanda, and Jnanakanda. Atri's list adds Sanatana Kanda to this list. Ananda Samhita has a Karmakanda. So a kanda just means it's a section. So here we have Satyakanda, the section on truth, the section on logic, the section on knowledge, right? Tarkakanda, Jnanakanda. Okay. So the Ananda Samhita has a Karmakanda, a section on works. Perhaps all of these make his works 5 in number, as stated by Brigu and Atri, right? So then those 5 would be Satyakanda, Tarkakanda, Jnanakanda, Sanatanakanda, and Karmakanda. Okay, except for Jnanakanda, which is in print, all the others are lost. Okay, so all the works are said to have contained 64,000 slokas. So we had up here the works of, it looks like the works of Brigu are treated first. There are 88,000 verses in the works of Brigu. There are 64 thousands of verses in the works of Kasyapa, but we only have a fraction of them. So they end in the words Kanda. Marichi's works now. So we dealt with Brigu and we dealt with Kasyapa, and now we have Marichi, and we'll talk about Atri probably at the end here. Marichi's works are 8. As stated in his Samudarchanadikarna, their names are Jaya Samhita, Ananda Samhita, Sangyana Samhita, Veera Samhita, Vijaya Samhita, Vijita Samhita, Vimala Samhita, and Jnana Samhita. His other work, Ananda Samhita, mentions Kalpita Samhita in the place of Jnana Samhita. So this may be another name for the Jnana Samhita, this Kalpita Samhita. Brigu's list enumerates 11 works, right? So Marichi says that he has in the Samudarchanadikarna, he says he has 8 works, but Brigu says he has 11 works. The list of Atri mentions the works of one Angirasa, which are 7. Some of them having different names. Some of these are the same as those attributed to Marichi. It is not clear whether Angiras is another name for Marichi, but Angiras is not mentioned anywhere else as an author of the Vaikanasa texts. Right, among these, the Vimana Archana Kalpa and the Ananda Samhita, Nanasa, are alone available. The works 23 in number. There's a few spelling mistakes here. The works 23 in number are stated to contain 184,000 slokas of verses. The names of all these works end in the word Samhita. So these are the works of Marichi. On the whole, so did we cover Atri at the end here? I think, let's see. Oh, Atri was at the beginning. So we did Atri, Brigu, Kasyapa, and Marichi. Finished. Okay, so we talked about all of their different works. Right, on the whole, the number of Samhitas of the Vaikanasa Agama comes to 60. Among them, 17 are available fully and in parts. 8 of them have been published. 2 have not been published at all. The remaining 7, which are also not in print, are available only in fragments. Okay, so for a full list, we have to look at some other books. So these texts, which are written mainly in verse, so they're not in prose, but they're written in slokas, which is just normal verses, right? These texts, which are written mainly in verse, are in the case of Atri and Brigu, as in the case of Atri and Brigu, but those of Kasyapa and Marichi are in prose. Okay, so we have 2 authors who wrote slokas and 2 authors that wrote in prose. All of them reveal a high level of literary attainment. In their contents, they are similar, and if there is any divergence, it is only in the more elaborate treatment of some topics in one than in the other. Among the 4 divisions, right? Remember that we said the Agamas are also, all Agamas are divided up into 4 divisions, right? So among the 4 divisions, remember the 4 divisions, they're Jnana, Yoga, Kriya, Charya, okay? So amongst the 4 divisions, which these contents are grouped, it is the Kriya Pada, right, that has received more attention than the others. Kriya Pada means the activities of building temples, carving deities, and installing those deities, right? Whereas the Charya section is about the daily and occasional worship at festivals or daily worship of the deity, right? So the Jnana and Yoga are the philosophical portions, which we have stated before are not much studied in the Agamas. But he's mentioned them here a little bit in the Vaikanasa Agama. Also in the Pancharatra Agama, the Jnana and Yoga sections are not much studied these days because they're not the more practical parts. Okay, so among the 4 divisions into which these contents are grouped, it is the Kriya Pada that has received more attention than the others. Charya receiving some treatment. The duties of a Vanaprastha, which are generally known as those of the duties of a Vanaprastha or a retired person, which are generally known as those of the Vaikanasas, right? The significant position which Vikanas, right, the sage Vikanas, held in regard to the rituals, and the lack of emphasis on the importance of the ascetic order, or sannyas, right, indicates that the Vaikanasa Agama is ritualistic to the core in its outlook and conception, right? Because sannyasis are not supposed to, so sannyasi to yogi chananira chatya, he's not supposed to perform any work or light any fire. So lighting fire means also performing sacrifice, right? That doesn't just mean cooking, right? So the Vaikanasans are identified with Vanaprasthas here. So here, how best the life here could be lived in strict conformity with Vedic traditions, and how effectively the Lord could be worshipped, have received attention in these works. In fact, the ascetic and the Vanaprastha are excluded from officiating as priests in certain rituals. Okay, that's interesting. That's a quotation. That's another quotation coming from Samurtachanadikarana. 30:14b. Right, that's interesting. So the Vanaprastha and the ascetic are excluded as officiating as priests in certain rituals. Okay, for certain rituals, yeah. The other two divisions of the Agama receive only brief treatment. What are the other two sections? They're the first sections of Jnana and Yoga. Right. So in general, the texts deal with the methods of construction of temples and making images. Installation, consecration, and worship of deities receive detailed treatment. Special ceremonial baths are described in minute details. Festivals, both public and private, right, get procedural treatment indicating the purposes to be served by conducting them. Special emphasis is laid on the ways and means of performing the rites of purification and expiation or atonement. The Shrouded Rituals, right, because remember these are all done according to Vedic mantras. So Shrouded Rituals are also ceremonies that we see in the Shruti or in the Vedas, right, receive special emphasis, and all of them are declared as representing the various ways in which Vishnu is worshipped. Naturally, the various types of priests, like the Ritvik, the Advaryu, and others, right, which are Vedic types of priests, because we have the Brahma, the Advaryu, the Brahma, the Advaryu, the Udgatri, and the Hotri are the four main Vedic priests, and then they have different Ritviks. There are also, each one of those four main priests has four subsequent priests, which also have names. Each priest has a name and a function like that, which I can't go into right now. Right, okay. But anyhow, these different types of priests and others have a prominent role to play in the rites connected to the temple worship. Mantras are frequently cited. Mantras, that's explained in the Vimanachanakalpa. Right, mantras are frequently cited for use, even for what may seem to be only a secular activity, like turning up the earth, meaning digging in the earth, at a chosen site to construct the basement for a temple. The directions for many an item are drawn from the sutras of Vaikanas. So all these things are based on the Vaikanas sutras. Right. So all are not entitled to adopt the directions or contained in these texts and conduct worship in the temples. So everybody's not. It's not like the Pancharatra where everybody can perform these ceremonies. Only that Brahman who has had the study of the Vedas and has undergone the consecratory rites, the samskaras, since conception, right, according to the rules laid down by Vikanas in his Kalpa Sutras, is competent to conduct the worship of the Lord in the temples. The Vaikanasas are exclusive worshippers of Vishnu and do this worship as an obligatory duty without expecting any results for it or from it. Some of the acts which are enjoined for worship, some of the acts which are enjoined for worship are peculiar to the Agamas. For instance, mandala, nyasa, and positions of the syllables in mantras are mentioned. The ducts or the nadis, the nerves, bindu, and other aspects of sonic creation, which come into the theory of Skota and everything like that, if you've read anything about other schools of Indian thought, are treated with reference to meditation. Shri is considered as the power or Shakti of Vishnu. And all these quotations are coming mostly from Samurta Achanikara, and the last three from Vimana Archanakalpa. So the opinions of others described as kechit, right? So he's got a quotation here from Vimana Archanakalpa where it says kechit means others, right? Are referred to. The opinions of others are referred to. Perhaps these persons were offering a different direction to certain practices that could not be effectively carried out for want of materials and facilities mentioned in these Agama texts. So, though having an easy flow of graceful expressions, archaic forms are not absent in these texts. So there are some archaic forms which are not practiced today. Let's see. Right. And this is a quotation from K.A. K.A. is the Pratyahara. Okay. So this does not at once indicate that they should be very ancient. Such expressions are generally met with in the epics and the Puranas and also in Kalpa Sutras. Right. So their presence in these texts could be explained on the ground that the authors of these works were sages who were practicing rituals. Right. The sages Marichi, Bhrigu, Atri, and Kashyapa are very ancient, and as it is generally admitted, many of these texts must have taken their rise in North India. The authors of the Kalpa Sutras mostly hail from North India. Curiously enough, the Vaikanasa Agama, as such, is not well known in North India. This is perhaps because the Kalpa Sutras of Vaikanas are followed by a handful of people who belong to the Taittiriya recension of the Krishna Yajurveda, which is popular only in South India, where the mode of worship in the temples must also have been derived from the Vaikanasa Agama. Okay, so now also we don't know also, so the Vaikanasans are Taittiriya Krishna Yajurvedans, right? Okay, so that means that that's why it's mostly seen in South India, but he says the Kalpa Sutras seem to have had their origin in North India. Now it may be because of the Mughal destruction, the Mughal invaders' destruction of the ancient temples in North India, that Vaikanasa was in North India, but then it died out because of the destruction of all these ancient temples, right? So that now it's only found in South India. So Taittiriya Krishna Yajurveda and Vaikanasa Agama could have been more widespread in the ancient past. We don't know, okay? So, but anyway, he's just saying here, it's interesting to see that the origin of the Kalpa Sutras seems to be in North India, but the Kalpa Sutra of Vaikanas is followed only by a handful of people in South India who follow the Krishna Yajurveda, the Taittiriya recension of the Krishna Yajurveda. Okay, so most Vaishnava temples in the south are at present governed by the Vaikanasa tradition. Perhaps these texts are more popular amongst the Tamilians, whose words of Tamil origin are found in some texts. Okay, so the Samurtarchanadikarna, which we've been talking about all along, which forms part of the Atri Samhita, has 83 chapters containing about 5,000 slokas or verses. 25 chapters of this work are concerned with architectural details, and 11 with rites of expiation or atonement, prayaschitta. So one full chapter, the 83rd, is devoted to the worship of the sun. The priests who attend to the worship of God in temples are required to be kept. So the sun can be worshipped also because Surya Narayana is considered the sun is considered a form of Narayana. Okay? Like that. Even then, there might be other deities in Vaikanasa Agama which are worshipped, not just Vishnu. Vishnu is the primary sort of worship, deity worship. but there might be attendant deities and associate deities that are also Parivara Devatas, which are also worshipped. So the priests who attend to the worship of God in temples are required to be kept in contentment, and otherwise the locality where the particular temple is situated would be visited by misery. So the idea is that these priests who are performing the Vaikanasa worship, they have to be satisfied. They have to always be satisfied. Otherwise, the community that they serve will undergo some problems and some misery. The Gotra and Pravara of 47 different families are mentioned in a separate chapter 63. So Gotra and Pravara can be, all of them, as far as I know, though, have to be connected somehow to the sage Vikanas here, right? So the colophon means there's usually at the end of this work, Samurdarchanadikarana, right? So when there'll be a manuscript, there'll usually be a notation at the end or at the beginning of the manuscript to say who's the person who wrote this manuscript, who copied it out, what date and time it was copied out, etc., etc. There'll be certain things. This is called the colophon. So the colophon of this work refers to this text as taught orally by Atri Prokta. So Atri taught this text, this text, which is Samurdarchanadikarana, which is supposed to be part of the Atri Samhita, naturally supposedly written by Atri, but here he's saying that the colophon of the text says actually that Atri spoke this and somebody else wrote it down. The printed text has a supplementary chapter called Ratha Pratishta Vidhi. Ratha Pratishta Vidhi would be the installation or the consecration of a chariot for the Lord, right? A prayoga or procedure for doing that, as belonging to Pura Tantra, one of the 4 works of Atri. So he's saying that the Samurdarchanadikarana has got put onto it as an appendix, right? The printed text of it has an appendix, a supplementary chapter, which is about the Ratha Pratishta. So the printed text has an appendix 1 containing 6 chapters representing a version based on a different manuscript. Okay, so also it's somewhat the printed text of this Samurdarchanadikarana, right? Also is somewhat of a critical edition in that it has an appendix which has 6 chapters based on a different manuscript, right? Brigu Kashyapa, it's not a true critical edition, but it's somewhat gives some variations in the text. Brigu Kashyapa, Angirasa, and Atri received teachings about the highest dharma, the supreme deity, and the method of worship from the 4 faces of Brahma, respectively in the east, south, west, and north borders. So Brahma has 4 faces. He faces east. So east, south, west, and north, his different faces face. So Brigu, Kashyapa, Angirasa, and Atri, right? Now here, I think what we're saying that Angirasa could be, he was saying the idea is Angirasa could be Marichi, right? Could be another name of Marichi, right? So Brigu, Kashyapa, either Marichi or Angirasa, he says here, and Atri, these 4 students, they sat in the 4 directions, and they were taught by Brahma from his 4 mouths, right? That's the idea in the different directions. While mentioning the various branches of learning, those of the Buddhists and Jains are also included, right? So this is interesting. So here, when mentioning in this text, which is what? Again, Samurdarchanadikarana of the Atri Samhita, right? It mentions different branches of learning. It also mentions Buddhism and Jainism. So when we see in different scriptures that Buddhism and Jainism is mentioned, it means that these scriptures must have come about after the advent of Buddhism and Jainism. So it's very easy to date those scriptures, at least generally. Right. So Buddhism are also included. The Agamas are said to be 5. The Agamas are said to be 5, namely Vaikanasa, Sattvata, Tirtha, Aikantika, and Mulaka. Right. So this is a quotation from Samudachana Adhikarana, which is what we're studying now, of the Atri Samhita. The Lord uttered some expressions, taking himself the form of a bird, and Brahma, who searched for the meaning of those expressions, is known as Vaikanas. Vaikanas. So now this is interesting because here, previously we had a discussion here about Brahma having four faces, and that naturally indicates four-faced Brahma or Chaturmukha Brahma. But here, down here, when he says Brahma down here, it's interesting. It says the Lord himself, the Lord uttered some expressions, taking himself the form of a bird, and Brahma, who searched for the meaning of those expressions, is here known to be Vaikanas. Right. So Vaikanas normally is identified with the Supreme Lord, Sriman Narayana. So in that sense, he can be said to be Brahma in that sense. But here we're talking about Chaturmukha Brahma, right? So it seems like this story is about the Lord becoming a bird and instructing Brahma, right? And that Brahma, Chaturmukha Brahma, is here known as Vaikanas. That's very strange to me. I don't understand that. The system which Vaikanas expounded became divided into four groups, right? So connected with the names Atri, Bhrigu, Marichi, and Kashyapa. We understood that before. The Sattva mode is based on the Ikayana Veda. Okay, so this idea of an Ikayana Veda is also mentioned in there, where the Vedas, which are known as four or three, were actually all together in one recension, which is called the Ikayana Veda. The Tirtha kind, so he's talking about these different arguments, Vaikanasa, Sattva, Tirtha, Aikantika, and Mulaka. So the Tirtha kind has 24 tantras and prescribes four kinds of initiation or diksha. It has four divisions, Jnana, Yoga, Kriya, and Charya, right? As in other agamas. And in addition, an additional section called Prayaschita. Right. The other two are not treated. What are the other two? The other two are, no, he just said the other two are the Aikantika and the Mulaka, which are not explained in this book, Samudachanand Adhikarana. So we don't know about them from this book. The subject matter in all these is stated to be one and the same. The vyuhas are stated to be five. The vyuhas are stated to be five in the Vaikanasa system and four in the Pancharatra system. So the vyuhas are expansions of the original personality of Godhead. Remember, we had those five in the beginning here. The pranava, or the omkara, represents the threefold vyuha. The threefold vyuha. Okay, so this is another statement from Samudachanand Adhikarana. Mention is made of the six infirmities, or urmi, namely grief, illusion, hunger, thirst, decay, and death, as the six sheaths or koshas of skin, flesh, blood, sinew, marrow, and bone, and the six phases of existence, namely taking birth, existing, changing, growing, declining, and dying. Six paths, adva, right, and six relations, namely para, apara, mahan, taralaka, divya, and divervara, right, which are connected with sound and sense, are also listed. So this is all being explained, right? Okay, the name Shaiva Siddhanta. Okay, the name of Shaiva Siddhanta is given of 28 kinds. Okay, we were discussing Vaikanasa Agama, but now in this Samudachanand Adhikarana, it's describing some other subjects, right? So it's also not only describing Vaikanasa Agama, but it's also describing some other agamas. So it also describes Shaiva Siddhanta. Shaiva Siddhanta is a type of Shaiva agamas. There are 28 kinds of Shaiva agamas. The Pasupata and the Yamala are of 6 and 9 kinds respectively. So there's 6 kinds of Pasupata agama and 9 kinds of Yamala respectively, right? And these are coming, this quotation again, this still should be reading from Samudachanand Adhikarana, correct. Okay, the system of the Buddhists, Nyaya or logic, and others are also then enumerated, right? So all of these subjects are divided. All of these different forms of knowledge are are elaborated. They're not elaborated on, but they're just named, right? So in this book, the names of the texts of the Pancharatra and those of the four sages of the Vaikanasa are given. For the latter together, the number of slokas is stated to be 64,000. So in the Samudarchanadikarana, it talks about 64,000 slokas of verses as the corpus of the Vaikanasa books by the four Vaikanasan sages. Right, and the number of texts as 25. The nature of reality and the eight-limbed yoga get treated in the next two chapters. Right. So there's an appendix 2, which deals with the nature and geography of the world and has only one chapter called Bhuvana Koshana Varnana. So Bhuvana means the world. Kosha means like a dictionary or a reference book, right? Varnana means, I guess, Avarnana, or Varnana, Kosha Varnana. It's an explanation about the world, right? Geography of the world. Probably it explains Puranic cosmology. As taken from Atri's Vishnu Tantra. So at the end of the printed text of the Samudachanadikarana, which we're talking about, there is a chapter numbered as 8. Okay, belonging to Atri's authorship and entitled Dur Nakshatra Prayaschita Vidi. Okay, so this is the Prayaschittas, the atonement ceremonies that we have to perform when something is done or somebody is born on a Dur Nakshatra, on a bad Nakshatra. Right. Right. The information contained in 2 appendices is very useful, yet the mention of Adva, which is generally treated in other agamas, Shakta, Shaiva, and Pancharatra, right, does not establish it as a genuine doctrine held by the Vaikanasa system. So just because this idea is mentioned, Adva, right, doesn't mean that it's actually a genuine doctrine of the Vaikanasa system, right? But it's generally treated in other agamas like Shakta, Shaiva, and Pancharatra. So among the texts of Bhrigu, the Kriyadikara, so now we finished talking about the Samudachanadikara. So now the Kriyadikara, which is a text of Bhrigu, right, that previous one is a text of Atri, right? So the Kriyadikara has 39 chapters containing 4,000 slokas of verses. Worship of God is of 3 kinds: in the mind, in the deity, and in the sacred fire, right? The first kind must be taken as meditation, but as offering worship in all of its details mentally conceived. So it's not just meditation on a mantra or a form of the Lord, but it's actually meditation, active meditation, where we are thinking about offering different services to the Lord, or mental worship. The second is carried out with respect to the deity, which has been installed. And the third kind is mentally conceiving of God as seated amidst the sacred fire and making offerings to him in that fire. This is also coming from the Kriyadikara, right? The worship of the deity is the best amongst these 3. So according to Vaikanasa Agama, the worship of the deity is better than meditation, it's better than fire ceremony. So expiratory rites, right, Prayaschita, is dealt with in the 5 chapters. It is also shown how to get over minor lapses during worship without undertaking an elaborate expiatory process. There are references to the treatment of the topic in the context of the Yagyadikara, Niruptadikara, and Kiladikara. The opinion of Angirasa is cited more than once. And remember, Angirasa could be another name for Marichi. Okay, so now we say Bhrigu's Yagyadikara contains 51 chapters. So we're talking about the contents of these different Vaikanasa agamas, which is quite interesting. Right, of which spiritual rites cover 6 chapters out of 51. The main subject matter is the worship of God according to the directions contained in the Vaikanasa system. The Prakirna Adhikara of Bhrigu is a supplement to Marichi's Vimanarchana Kalpa and Atri's Samudarchana Adhikarana. It contains 24,000 slokas in 37 chapters. The greatest of the Vaikanasa system, offenses or apacharas, otherwise known as aparadas, right? And the nature of sin are treated there. Some of the slokas or verses in the last chapter are identical with those in the Manusmriti, which is interesting. Right, so Bhrigu is mentioned as the propounder of the doctrines of the Manusmriti. He may be identical with this Bhrigu. 6 chapters of this Prakirnadikara are devoted to expiatory rites. The Kiladikara of Bhrigu has 3 sections called Jnana, Kriya, and Yoga, dealing respectively with Tattva Jnana, practice of worship, and meditation on God. Okay. Kasypa's Jnana Kanda is in prose, containing 108 chapters. While recommending the worship of the deity, it is said that here the eyes and the mind get delighted through such worship, and perfect remembrance of God becomes possible. This gives rise to devotion and faith. He who has faith and devotion has complete success in all endeavors. There is mention of 9 kinds of regions named Vaishnava, Brahma, Rodra, Indra, having to do with Indra, right? Garuda, Bhautika, having to do with Bhutas, Asura, Rakshasa, having to do with Rakshasas, and Paisacha, having to do with Paisachas. Right. So only the first is to be chosen for the erection of temples. So what they're saying here is that in this Jnanakanda of Kasyapa, which is in prose, right, 108 chapters, that there are different areas, different land areas, and the first one, the Vaishnava land area, is the only one which is to be taken as a place to erect a temple. How the villages and towns are to be formed is detailed in 4 chapters. The person who is devoted to God must set apart 1/3 of his property for the maintenance of his family and spend the remainder on building a temple and maintaining it. Right. So this is the ideal life of a householder, that he has to set aside 1/3 of his money for the maintenance of his family, and the rest of it, 2/3, he's going to spend on making a temple for the worship of God. Among the 5 forms, right? Remember, there are 5 viewers in Vaikanasa. The unchanging and highest one is Brahman, called Vishnu. His form is characterized by bare existence and is subtle. He is then partless. The question that should arise then is regarding the forms of Satya, Achyuta, Purusha, and Aniruddha, which are the other 4 forms. And normally when we see Satya, Achyuta, Purusha, and Aniruddha, right, we actually see these depicted. It's very interesting. If you look at the Pranava Vimana of the Sri Rangam temple, if you look around the four corners of them, you'll see Vasudeva. You'll see this. You'll see these different forms, which are not exactly the same forms in Pancharatra. So it tends to make you believe that the Sri Rangam temple was originally a Vaikanasa temple, and perhaps Ramanuja was the one who changed it to being a Pancharatra temple. So the question that would arise when then is regarding the forms of Satya, Achyuta, Purusha, and Aniruddha. It is said that these are only the created forms of Vishnu, like the shape of written characters, or lipi, which means the shape of written characters. In other words, there are sounds of the alphabet, and the sounds are the pure original things, right? And then there are the forms that we use when we write. Later on, writing came into being, and so we made symbols on pieces of paper or carved them on stones or whatever, right, to indicate those sounds. The characters are only the symbols of various sounds. Close union of the self and God marks the stage of moksha. 12 chapters are devoted to expiatory rites or prayaschitta. Right. Marichi's Vimana Archana Kalpa, which is written in prose, has 101 chapters, of which 40 are devoted to the construction of temples, 6 to daily worship, 3 to bath, 3 chapters on bath, right? So I'm not sure here whether it talks about whether it means the bath of the deity or the bath of the archika, the person who's performing the worship. Maybe it's both. 11 to the conduct of festivals and installation of other deities, right? 19 to acts of expiation, right? 1 to the deities in charge of the holy fire pit or the Agni Kunda. 4 to the code of practices, right? How to live one's life. 14 to tattva, and 1 to the extent of the Vaikanasa texts. So giving lists of other Vaikanasa texts. The texts open with 2 stanzas of benediction in honor of the god Srinivasa. Srinivasa normally means Tirupati Balaji, who's in Tirumala, who gets a glorious description. That temple, by the way, is also a Vaikanasa temple. Marichi is the narrator of the text, right? So which we would assume, just like Atri Samhita was also spoken by Atri. So here Marichi is the author, is not the only author, but the narrator of the text. At the outset, he speaks of the means of getting final release or liberation. God Narayana must be worshipped with mantras taken from the 4 Vedas in the manner prescribed by them. Finally, that self which adopts this way of life would reach his place. So the person who adopts this particular type of lifestyle, worshipping Narayana with mantras taken from the 4 Vedas, he will ultimately reach that spiritual abode and he will attain moksha. Passages from the Rig Veda, Taittiriya Aranyaka, Aitreya Brahmana, and Taittiriya Upanishad are cited to show that Vishnu is a supreme being. We saw in our other class on Vaishnavism how these Vedic verses in the Rig Veda, in the Taittiriya Aranyaka, in the Aitreya Brahmana, even in the Sadapada Brahmana, and the Taittiriya Upanishad especially, show that Vishnu is a supreme being. So worship. So here even the great sages like Marichi here, right? Otherwise sometimes known as Angirsa by some, right? So he mentions these quotations from the Shruti as proving that Sriman Narayana is a supreme person. Right, worship of the supreme being, Paramapurusha, is called Vimana Archana. Right, so that's why it's called Vimanarchana Kalpa. Kalpa means the worship or the performance of ritual for the Vimanarcha, which explains the title of the work. Right, so the results which accrue from this worship are stated to be equal to those of performing the Agnihotra, right? Agnihotra being a Shrauta ceremony, right, of fire ceremony, one of the fire ceremonies in Shrauta sutras, right? Even for those who do not do it, and all-round prosperity for those who do. Marichi declares he will set forth the way of doing this worship, which he denotes by the name as Kriya Marga, right? The path of action, right? Of doing actions, right? Suggesting that this text is devoted to the Kriya aspect of the Agamas, right? So we have Jnana, Yoga, Kriya, and Charya, right? This is evident from the large number of chapters, 1 to 40, devoted to the procedural details regarding the construction of temples and installation of deities therein. On this account, it is not implied that the Charya aspect is not given importance. Chapters 41 to 85 discuss this matter, that is Charya, or the actual worship of the deity in occasional and daily aspects. So special mention must be made of the detailed treatment given to the conduct of festivals and to the acts of expiation. 19 chapters, which detail the latter, or the Prayaschita, the expiation, indicate the pro-Vedic character of the Vaikanasa system. So the word Vimana, which means the story in the structure of the temple, Vimana is usually over the top of the deity, is called a Vimana. Over the gate is called a Gopuram, in the Dravidian form of temple architecture. Indicates that God must be worshipped in a temple or underneath the Vimana. Right. Okay, so the very title of the book, Priyadhikara, indicates the importance in the book of Kriya, of the part of Kriya. So let's just finish this sentence. 19 chapters which detail the latter, meaning what? Expiation or Prayaschita, indicate the pro-Vedic character of Vaikanasa system in particular and of the Agamas in general. The treatment of tattva, which is what he was talking about in the beginning, that the agamas cannot be said to be separate from the shruti or shruti or the shrauta, because they come out from the shrauta. They have their basis, and then that's part of their what makes them definitive. Right. Treatment of tattva, yogic practices, and moksha show that jnana and yoga aspects are not also ignored in the Vaikanasa Agama. These texts of the four sages lay great stress on the practical side of construction of temples and worship of the deity. Architecture and iconography received greater attention in the Samudarchana Adhikarana of Atri and the Vimanarchana Kalpa of Marichi. Whatever be the topic, the Jnana Kanda of Kasyapa gives a complete and logical treatment. Right. So this title may seem to be inappropriate to the work of Kasyapa, for it is not Tattva Jnana that receives treatment here. On the other hand, the practical side of the Agamas, right, gets elaborated, and the word jnana has relevance to the knowledge of this aspect. Right. So in other words, we shouldn't be fooled by the name Jnana Kanda of Kashyapa, because this jnana that's discussed in his Jnana Kanda is actually the knowledge of Kriya and Charya as well. Right. The knowledge of all these topics, in fact. Right. So the title thus gets its justification. The nature of reality is dealt with in this book in a casual manner, while the treatment is more detailed in the work of Marichi. The yoga and charya aspects get brief treatment in the works of Marichi and Brigu. The works which are lost might perhaps have conveyed more information about the jnana and yoga aspects, but as we have been saying all along, the jnana and yoga aspects of all the agamas seem to be less studied, and therefore it's not unusual that they might have become lost. Because when people are copying manuscripts, they copy the parts that they like, or that they actually use, right? They use more often, so they'll copy those. And the ones that they don't use more often, sometimes they get neglected and they pass off, they get lost. Okay, so it is true that Vedic mantras alone are prescribed in these texts in every ritual. In addition, mantras are cited from the mantra prashna of the Vaikanasas. So the Pancharatrans, the Taittiriya Krishna Yajurveda Vedans have a particular book called Mantra Pata, right, in which the mantras for their Shrauta ceremonies and samskars are contained separately from the instructions in the Brahmanas and the Aranyakas on how to perform those ceremonies, right? Here he's saying that there's a mantra prashna, there's a particular book, Mantra Prashna of the Vaikanasas, which contain all of the mantras used by the Vaikanasans. Okay, so that is the end of the section on, that's the end of the section on Vaikanasa Agamas, and next we take up Pancharatra Agamas.